Life can change in an instant. And sometimes, a single act of kindness can transform a life in ways we never expected. This is the story of Emma, a woman who lost everything but found hope again through the unwavering support of Jack, a man from her past. Together, they embark on a journey of healing, trust, and love, discovering that it's never too late to rebuild a future. Join us today as we share Emma's incredible journey of resilience and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story with life stories. It was a busy morning in the heart of the city. Jack Davis, a ruthless millionaire known for his sharp business acumen, was walking briskly across a crowded street corner. His mind was preoccupied with the usual things, dealings, meetings, and the endless tasks that came with being at the helm of a multi-million-dollar empire. But something stopped him in his tracks that day. Something so unexpected that it made his heart skip a beat. A woman, sitting on the sidewalk. She was hunched over, wrapped in ragged clothing. Her face, though marked by the grime of the street, was unmistakable. Jack's heart raced as he stared at her. Even in her desperate state, he knew who she was. It couldn't be anyone else. It was Emma Johnson, the girl he had once loved from afar. The girl who had been the object of his silent affection during his school days. The girl who had never noticed him, except to laugh at his awkward attempts to gain her attention. And now, here she was, sitting on the cold concrete, looking nothing like the vibrant young woman he remembered. Life had stripped her of the confidence, the beauty, the energy she once had. The woman before him was unrecognizable in her brokenness. But Jack knew it was her. Her once glowing face was now tired and marked with the signs of years of suffering. Emma wasn't alone. Beside her, two little girls, no more than 4 years old, were sitting quietly. Their clothes, like Emma's, were worn and torn, and one of them was rubbing her eyes with tiny, dirty hands, tears streaking her face. The other sat silently, clutching her mother's arm. The contrast between their innocence and the harshness of their surroundings was heartbreaking. Jack felt a pang of sorrow as he watched the scene unfold. He couldn't bear it any longer. "Sweetheart, it's okay," Emma murmured softly, her voice trembling. She stroked her daughter's hair, trying to comfort her, though her own voice was full of desperation. "Someone will help us soon. We'll be okay." But Jack knew, this wasn't okay. This was far from okay. He couldn't simply walk past. He couldn't pretend he didn't see her. See them. It wasn't in his nature. And perhaps, in the deepest part of his heart, he knew that this wasn't just a random encounter. No, it felt like fate. Fate that had brought Emma and her daughters back into his life. When everything had changed so much for both of them. "Emma?" Jack said, his voice tentative, almost unsure of whether she would even recognize him. The name sounded foreign on his lips after all these years. The woman, once so vibrant and full of life, slowly lifted her head, her eyes widening as she heard the voice. Her expression was one of disbelief, mixed with a deep sense of shame. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "is that you?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them hung heavy with unsaid words. With memories, with regret, Emma lowered her gaze to the ground, unable to meet his eyes for too long. The silence stretched between them, like an old wound that neither of them knew how to address. "What happened to you?" Jack finally asked, unable to hide the concern that had settled in his chest. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, his emotions bubbling to the surface. Emma looked away, clutching her daughters even tighter as if to shield them from Jack's gaze. "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "We're fine. Just go away, Jack." Jack felt the weight of her words. But something in his heart wouldn't let him leave. He couldn't ignore what he saw before him. It wasn't just Emma he was worried about. It was the little girls, the twins, who were so clearly in need of help. One was sobbing softly, her small body trembling, while the other just stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. They were hungry, they were cold, they were alone. "No, you're not fine," Jack said firmly, taking a step forward. "Come with me, I'll help you. You don't have to be out here in the cold." He reached out, offering his hand, though Emma hesitated. I can't. Emma began to protest, her voice low and filled with shame. I can't accept your help. Not now, not after everything. Jack's heart ached as he stood there, looking at the woman he had once loved. He understood her hesitation, pride, shame, guilt. They all weighed heavily on her. But he couldn't stand to see her like this. He couldn't stand to see her daughters suffer. Listen to me, Jack said softly, his voice steady but full of determination. You're coming with me, and we'll figure everything out. No more arguments. Emma. He wasn't going to take no for an answer. After a long moment of silent hesitation, Emma finally relented, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She knew, deep down, that there was no way out of this. No way to survive on the street with 2 young children. She took his hand, her grip reluctant but grateful. As Jack made a quick phone call to his driver, he couldn't help but think of the Emma he had known so many years ago, the confident, radiant girl who had always seemed untouchable. Now, here she was, broken and vulnerable, and yet still holding on to the little bit of pride she had left. Don't worry, Jack said as he hung up the phone. Help is on the way. Let's get you out of here. The car pulled up soon after, and Jack carefully helped Emma into the back seat, cradling one of the twins in his arms while she held the other. The ride to his mansion was quiet, the only sound being the soft breathing of the girls. Emma stared out the window, lost in her thoughts, while Jack sat beside her, glancing at her every now and then, wondering what had happened to her life. How had things gotten so bad? He was determined to find out. But for now, all he could do was offer her the warmth of his mansion and the comfort of knowing she and her daughters were safe. And that, for the moment, would have to be enough. The ride to Jack's mansion felt long, despite the quiet hum of the car's engine. As they approached the sprawling estate, Emma couldn't help but feel out of place. The grand, immaculate house, with its shining windows and perfectly manicured gardens, seemed like another world compared to the cold, desolate streets she had called home for the past few years. She was hesitant. How could she ever fit in here? How could she accept anything from a man like Jack Davis, someone so far removed from her reality? But when the car pulled up to the grand entrance, and Jack helped her and the girls inside, the warmth enveloped her. It was more than just the temperature, it was the feeling of safety, of security. She hadn't felt this kind of comfort in a long time. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harper, greeted them with a quiet, surprised look but didn't say anything. She simply nodded at Jack's instructions and led them to a room for the night. Inside, the girls seemed to sense the change. Their little faces, still tired and tear-streaked, softened as they saw the plush surroundings. They immediately ran to the sofa, curling up against their mother as Emma sank into the plush cushions. Overwhelmed, it wasn't just the softness of the fabric, it was the comfort of knowing they weren't going to sleep on the streets tonight. Jack had given them a night of peace, a night of refuge. I'll have food prepared, Jack said quietly, as he moved to the fireplace and started the fire. The flickering warmth filled the room, and Emma felt the tears she had been holding back all day threaten to spill over. As the girls eventually fell asleep on the sofa, Emma sat, looking at them with a deep, aching love. She was so grateful to Jack, though she didn't know how to show it. She had spent so many years surviving on her own, too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit how far she had fallen. But Jack had insisted, and now here they were, in a mansion she felt she didn't deserve. Her mind kept racing, trying to make sense of everything. How had she ended up here? Where had her life gone so wrong? As the evening passed, Emma felt herself growing more comfortable in the silence that surrounded her. Jack had left the room after making sure they were settled, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt herself letting go of the constant worry and anxiety that had ruled her life. She allowed herself a few moments to just rest, to breathe. The next morning, Emma woke early, staring out the window at the vast garden outside. The sun had barely begun to rise, but already, she could feel a change inside her. Her daughters were sleeping soundly in the bed beside her, their faces relaxed, free from the worry they had carried for so long. She knew she should feel relief. But there was a tight knot in her chest that wouldn't loosen. How could she truly accept this? How could she rely on Jack? Downstairs, Jack was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked up when she walked in, offering a faint smile. "Good morning, Emma. How are you feeling today?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. She felt lost, caught between the weight of her pride and the warmth Jack was offering. "I'm okay," she said quietly, still unsure how to express the feelings swirling inside her. He gestured for her to sit. "I've asked Mrs. Harper to prepare breakfast for you and the girls," he said. "You don't have to worry about anything today. Just rest." As the morning went on, Emma found herself slowly starting to relax. The girls, having just woken up, excitedly ran to the table to eat, their eyes wide with wonder at the spread before them. They had never seen so much food in one place. Fruit, juices, warm bread, things they hadn't had in so long. Jack, watching them with quiet admiration, looked over at Emma, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, we need to talk," he said after a while. Once the girls had settled in another room to play, Emma stiffened, not wanting to delve into the painful details of her life. She had kept it all buried for so long. But Jack's eyes were kind, and she could see the genuine concern there. "I want to understand what happened to you," Jack said gently. "I saw you yesterday, and I know this didn't happen overnight. You were always full of life. So full of promise. What happened?" She looked away, her hands tightening in her lap. It hurt to talk about. But Jack was persistent, and there was no way to avoid the conversation. "After high school," she started, her voice barely a whisper, "I started dating Ben Harris. He was the most popular guy in school. And I thought we had something real. We were happy for a while. Or at least, I thought we were. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought we'd face it together. But he abandoned me. He didn't want the responsibility. He left me alone with no support." Jack's jaw tightened as she spoke, and he clenched his fists on the table. "He just left you? Just like that?" he asked, the anger in his voice barely contained. Emma nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Yes, I was alone, and I didn't know what to do. My parents couldn't help me, and the job I had didn't pay enough. Slowly, things started to fall apart. The bills piled up. When the twins were 2, we were evicted from our apartment. And since then, we've been living on the streets. I've been trying to survive. But it's hard with 2 small children. I was ashamed of how far I'd fallen. So I never asked for help." Jack sat in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had known Emma as a confident, bright young woman, the girl who seemed to have everything ahead of her. And now, hearing what had happened, it was as if the world had broken her into pieces he couldn't have imagined. "Emma, no one deserves to go through what you've been through," Jack said softly, his voice full of empathy. "You're not alone anymore. I'll help you, and I'll help the girls." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in years, she felt a small spark of hope. But it wasn't just the hope for herself. It was the hope for her daughters, a hope that they would never know the kind of struggle Emma had faced. Jack reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I'll help you get back on your feet. Emma, I won't let you go through this alone." The following days at Jack's mansion seemed to pass in a blur for Emma. The initial shock of everything, the grand home, the warmth, the safety, began to wear off, and she found herself gradually settling into the rhythm of life there. But the weight of her past still clung to her, and no amount of luxury could fully erase the deep scars of the years she had spent struggling. Jack, however, was patient with her. He never pushed too hard. But he was always there, watching, encouraging, offering a quiet presence of support. The mansion had become a haven for Emma and her daughters. A place where they could breathe, where they could rest. But Emma couldn't help but feel the nagging sensation that she wasn't truly living. She wasn't truly moving forward. One evening, as Emma sat by the fire with the twins, Jack came to her with an idea. "Emma, I've been thinking," he said, sitting beside her, You've spent so much time looking after the girls. Trying to survive. But what about you? What do you want for yourself? Emma's heart sank at the question. What did she want? She had been so focused on surviving. So focused on getting by each day. That she had forgotten what it was like to have dreams. To have goals. I don't know, she admitted. I just want to make sure they're okay. I want them to be happy. To have a better life. I understand that, Jack said softly. But Emma, you deserve more than just surviving. You deserve to thrive, and I believe you can. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. How? I don't have anything. I don't have the skills or the education. I haven't had a real job in years. Jack's expression softened, his voice growing warmer. That's exactly why you need to take the opportunity now. There's no reason you can't start again. You don't need to do it all at once. But you can start. What do you think about studying? What if you went back to school? Or took some courses? You could learn new skills. Find a career that you love. Something that can support you and the girls. Emma sat back, her mind spinning. She hadn't thought about going back to school. She had always thought it was out of reach. That it was too late. But the idea, the possibility of having something more than just survival, filled her with a quiet hope. She didn't know where it would lead. But she couldn't deny that a part of her longed for it. Jack seemed to sense her hesitation. And he leaned forward, his eyes earnest. You have so much potential. Emma, I've seen it, and I want to help you get back on your feet. Not just financially, but emotionally and mentally. I'll support you, but you need to believe in yourself first. Her heart twisted. The idea of going back to school seemed so distant. So far away. But for the first time in a long time, she considered it. Could she really do this? Could she rebuild her life? Not just for her daughters, but for herself? That night, as Emma lay in bed, her thoughts raced. She had spent so many years buried in shame, hiding from the reality of her situation, trying to protect her daughters from the world's cruelty. But what if she could offer them more than just survival? What if she could show them that they could dream? That they could reach for something better? The next morning, as Jack appeared at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee, he smiled at her. Have you thought about it? Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding. Yes, she said quietly. I'll do it. I'll take those courses. Jack's face lit up with a smile. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a glimmer of excitement. She wasn't just taking a step for her daughters anymore. She was taking it for herself. Jack arranged for her to take classes on business and entrepreneurship, giving her the chance to learn something new, to find her own path. The first few days were overwhelming. There were moments when Emma felt like she was drowning in the workload. But Jack was always there, offering encouragement. Slowly, she began to regain her confidence. Each small victory, each page read, each concept learned, filled her with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. During this time, the bond between Emma and Jack began to grow stronger. He was her quiet support, her steady hand when things got difficult. She began to see him in a new light, not just as the man who had offered her shelter, but as someone who truly believed in her, someone who saw her potential even when she couldn't see it herself. And slowly, Emma started to realize that perhaps this wasn't just about rebuilding her life. It was about learning to trust again. It was about opening herself up to new possibilities. But most of all, it was about remembering who she was. The person who had once had dreams and ambition. And with Jack by her side, those dreams seemed within reach once more. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself embracing the changes in her life. Each day felt like a step forward. No matter how small, her daughters, Harper and Hazel, were flourishing in their new surroundings. Their laughter filling the once quiet halls of Jack's mansion. They no longer looked like the weary children from the streets. Their faces were brighter, their smiles wider. Emma couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of relief that they were no longer living in fear. No longer struggling just to make it through each day. But even as the peace of their new life settled in, Emma knew she had more work to do. The lessons she was learning through her studies were important. But there was something deeper at play. Something inside her was still healing. She had spent so many years living in survival mode, clinging to what little she had, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Jack had been her constant source of support throughout this journey, offering both the guidance she needed and the space to find her own way. But there was something else he had given her, something Emma had never anticipated. His patience, his unwavering belief in her, had begun to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. Slowly, without even realizing it, she was allowing herself to feel again. She was starting to trust him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in years. One evening, as they sat down to a quiet dinner, the atmosphere between them shifted. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic moment, but something unspoken passed between them. Emma could feel it in the air, something fragile, yet undeniable. She looked up at Jack, who was watching her with that same steady gaze. And for the first time in a long time, she felt vulnerable, but it wasn't the old vulnerability, the kind that made her feel exposed and weak. It was the kind of vulnerability that came with knowing someone cared for you deeply. Someone who wasn't just offering help out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. Jack, Emma said quietly, breaking the silence, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me and the girls. You've given us so much. But there's still so much I need to figure out. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully repay you for what you've done. Jack smiled, his expression softening as he reached across the table and gently took her hand. Emma, you don't have to repay me for anything. I'm doing this because I believe in you. And I believe in your potential. You and the girls, you all deserve happiness. You deserve a future. I'm just glad I can be a part of that. His words sent a warmth through her chest. But there was also a quiet fear. A fear that perhaps, in accepting his help, she was opening herself up to more than just the help she had so desperately needed. A fear that maybe, just maybe, she was opening herself up to love again. But that thought terrified her. And she quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to think about love. Not yet. Despite her reservations, something shifted within Emma that night. She realized that her life was no longer about mere survival. It was about thriving, about becoming the person she had always dreamed of being. She had been given a second chance. Not just to build a better life for her daughters, but to rebuild her own life. The following days were filled with small moments of growth. Emma continued her studies, gradually building her confidence. Her work at Jack's company, though still in its early stages, gave her a sense of purpose. She was no longer just existing. She was building something real. Jack was always there, supporting her every step of the way. He encouraged her when things got tough, celebrated her victories, and reassured her when she doubted herself. The more time they spent together, the more Emma realized how much she had come to depend on him. He had become more than just her benefactor. He had become a friend, a confidant, and maybe, just maybe, something more. One afternoon, as they sat on the terrace watching the sun set over the city, Emma turned to Jack with a new sense of clarity. She still wasn't sure where this path was leading, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't walking it alone anymore. Thank you, she said, her voice full of sincerity. For everything. I never thought I'd be here, in this place, feeling this way, but I am, and I can't wait to see where this journey takes us. Jack smiled, his eyes warm with affection. We're just getting started, Emma. The best is yet to come. And for the first time in a long time, Emma believed him. As the months passed, Emma and Jack's bond grew stronger with each passing day. What had started as an act of kindness, a gesture of support, had blossomed into something neither of them could ignore. Emma, once broken and lost, now stood tall with the knowledge that her future was hers to shape. With Jack's unwavering belief in her and her own determination, she was building a new life, a life full of promise, love, and possibility. Jack had always been there, silently supporting her in ways she never thought possible. As Emma watched her daughters grow, seeing them smile and laugh without fear, she knew the decision to trust Jack had been the right one. They were a family now, not bound by blood, but by the love and trust they had cultivated. The final piece of Emma's journey was yet to come. as she realized that she was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. She had found not only a future for herself but a home in Jack and her girls. And the love she had once thought impossible, the love she had been too afraid to embrace, had finally found its place in her heart. As she sat beside Jack one evening, the soft glow of the city lights casting a peaceful glow around them, Emma smiled. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude and hope. Jack took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Yes, it is. And we'll face it all together." For Emma, the future no longer seemed uncertain. It was bright and full of hope. A life she had never imagined, but one she would cherish forever. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow new videos from Life Stories.